My daughter secretly got married yesterday. I found out on Instagram. For 25 years, I built every dream of hers with my own hands. I paid for a private college education, an apartment in an upscale neighborhood, an imported car, trips to Europe. I supported her every whim while she treated me like a maid in her own house. But the dream wedding we'd planned together since she was 8. She did that without inviting me. Pain cut through my chest like glass when I saw the first photos appear on my feed. She was radiant in white, wearing a French lace veil. He was smiling proudly alongside his entire family, relatives I've known for decades celebrating and toasting. Everyone was there. Distant cousins, childhood friends, neighbors, co-workers. Everyone except me. "Mom, you were going to create drama and ruin my perfect day," was the cowardly excuse I received via WhatsApp message. Drama for wanting to be part of the most important moment of my only daughter's life. Drama for existing in the story I built with so much sacrifice and unconditional love. There, sitting in the kitchen of the house I bought for her to live in before the wedding, looking at those photos that erased me from the family narrative itself, an absolute certainty arose within me. They see me as an uncomfortable problem, as a social obstacle, as the simple black mother who shames the new, sophisticated, whitewashed life my daughter has chosen to embrace. But there's something none of them have the slightest idea about me. Something I've kept completely silent for 3 decades, protecting a family that now shamelessly rejects me publicly. A financial secret that could turn this game upside down. Because who they think I am and who I really am are 2 completely different people. And when they discover the full truth about Celia Santos, they'll understand that underestimating and humiliating me was the biggest mistake they could have made in their lives. The fragile woman they trampled yesterday is not the same woman who woke up determined today. The tables have turned. The rules have changed forever. And I finally decided to stop feigning weakness and play to actually win. My name is Celia Santos, I'm 62 years old. And until yesterday I believed I had a family that loved me. How naive of me. You know how you spend decades of your life building sandcastles for other people, thinking you're investing in love. But in reality, you're just fueling ingratitude. That's exactly what I did with my daughter Bianca. Every sacrifice I made, every dream I gave up to fulfill hers, every silent humiliation I swallowed, thinking it was for her own good. She was born when I was only 17. Her father disappeared before she even took her first steps. I raised her alone, working as a maid during the day and selling snacks outside the school at night. I saw other mothers picking up their children in the car while I waited for the crowded bus with her in my arms. But I promised my daughter would have everything I never had. And I kept every promise. Law school at a very expensive private university. A 6-month exchange program in France. A furnished apartment when I graduated. A brand new car for my 25th birthday. Everything paid for with the sweat of my brow and some very smart financial decisions I made over the years. But the more I gave, the more distant she became. Started with small things. Her accent changed after college. She stopped introducing me as her mother to new friends, saying only, "Celia." She stopped coming to my suburban house, always making excuses for us to meet in neutral places. The groom showed up 2 years ago. Traditional family, important surname, old money. Rodrigo could barely hide his discomfort when he saw me. He greeted me with that political smile rich people use on poor people. And Bianca, she pretended not to notice, or worse, pretended it was normal. That's why so many mothers like me choose to stay here, sharing these intimate pains, because they know that someone will understand this specific loneliness of someone who gave everything and received ingratitude in return. But what none of them imagine is that this humiliated mother keeps secrets that could shake the structures they built on lies. The signs began subtly, as always happens when those who should love us decide to slowly erase us from their own history. First came the photos on social media. Bianca always documented every special moment of her life, but I simply disappeared from every image. When we were together at a family event or celebration, she would capture impossible photo angles where I magically disappeared from the frame. When I questioned her about it, she laughed in that new, artificial way she developed. "Mom, you're so dramatic and paranoid. They're just silly photos, they don't mean anything. Then came the increasingly elaborate and cruel excuses. Her bridal shower was just for close college friends. The lingerie shower was kind of a generational thing, you wouldn't feel comfortable with the games. The bachelorette party was a little too wild for you, Mom. Each deliberate exclusion was carefully packaged in false maternal concern, as if they were protecting me from potential embarrassment, when in reality they were protecting me from existing in the sophisticated life I helped build brick by brick. Worst of all were the subtle changes in our family dynamic. When she occasionally brought Rodrigo over for dinner at my simple suburban home, I could clearly see his gaze. He analyzed every modest piece of furniture, every detail of the decor with that naturally superior air of someone mentally cataloging other people's poverty. She became visibly tense during these rare visits, as if deeply ashamed of her own humble origins. He started correcting me publicly when I said something socially incorrect in front of him. It's "we went to the mall, Mom," not "we went to the mall." The tone was always sweet and caring, but the social venom was always crystal clear between the lines. I swallowed each daily humiliation because I naively believed it was temporary. That after the wedding ceremony, things would naturally return to normal. That she would finally officially include me in the new life she was building. That I would meet the in-laws, be socially introduced, and have my place secured in the extended family. How completely wrong I was about everything. How pathetically naive I was to think that decades of maternal sacrifice could compete with the profound social shame my dark skin and peripheral origins represented for her. The cold, hard truth is that Bianca didn't cut me out of the wedding by accident or oversight. She strategically cut me out because I was the only visible obstacle between her and the completely white, socially sophisticated life she'd always secretly longed for. But there's something fundamental she could never have imagined about this humble mother, whom she chose to completely hide from the sophisticated world. Something that could instantly transform all this accumulated humiliation into real and devastating financial power. The most painful irony of this whole situation is that for years I pretended to be smaller than I really am, precisely so as not to intimidate or embarrass my own daughter. I clearly remember the day she asked me to never pick her up from college again. "Mom, you can give me the fare and I'll take the bus anyway." When I insisted on knowing why, she finally confessed with tears in her eyes. "Because the girls keep asking if you're my maid or a distant relative." At that moment my heart broke, but I made a decision that I now realize was fatal. I started hiding to protect her ego. I started wearing simpler clothes when we went to places where she might run into acquaintances. I avoided talking about my business when other people were around. I pretended not to understand certain topics so as not to embarrass her with my lack of sophistication. I became a diminished version of myself, thinking I was being a good mother. What I didn't realize was that every time I diminished myself to make her feel bigger, I was teaching my daughter that it was acceptable to be ashamed of who brought her into this world. I was feeding a monster of ingratitude that was silently growing inside her. During all these years of pretending, I built an empire behind the scenes. 3 cleaning companies that serviced the city's most expensive buildings. 2 industrial laundries. 4 strategically located commercial properties. Investments that yield more in a month than precious Rodrigo's annual salary. All this while playing the role of the humble and dependent mother. It is at this very point that many people feel the natural impulse to show support for this painful journey, leaving a small, silent signal that this profound story truly touched something within them. Because the truth that Bianca never imagined is that the woman she was so ashamed to present to society is, in reality, richer and more powerful than her fiancé's entire traditional family combined. And now that she's publicly humiliated me in the cruelest way possible, the time has finally come for her to discover who Celia Santos really is. And the consequences of this discovery will shake every foundation of the lie she's built about our relationship. Because when you play with the heart of a woman who sacrificed 3 decades of her life for you, you need to be prepared for the devastating consequences of that betrayal. The decision to reveal who I really am was not born out of an impulse for revenge, but out of a desperate need to regain my own dignity. For weeks after discovering the wedding on social media, I stayed locked in my house, crying like an abandoned child. I looked at photos where everyone was smiling happily while I simply didn't exist. I saw my radiant daughter in the arms of a man who could barely hide his contempt for me. I watched relatives I knew as babies, now elegant adults, celebrating a union from which I was deliberately excluded. The pain was physical. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my chest aching, as if someone had stuck a knife between my ribs and slowly twisted it with each breath. I'd spend hours sitting in the kitchen, drinking cold coffee, trying to understand where I'd gone so wrong in raising my only daughter. But it was on one of those sleepless nights that something radically changed inside me. I was looking at old photos of us from when she was little, and she looked at me as if I were the most important woman in the world. In those images, I saw a mother who had completely abandoned herself, a woman who became invisible so that her daughter could shine. And I realized something devastating. I had taught Bianca to discard me. Every time I pretended to be less intelligent, less capable, less important, I was giving her permission to treat me as disposable. I had created the very monster that now devoured me. In that silent dawn, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would no longer pretend to be small. I would no longer accept crumbs of affection from those who should love me unconditionally. I would no longer support a luxurious life for those who were ashamed of my existence. I got up, went to my secret office, and began organizing all the documents that proved my true wealth. Every contract, every proof of income, every property deed. The paperwork from a lifetime of building wealth while feigning poverty. The plan that began to form in my mind that night wasn't about destruction. It was about revelation. It was about showing an ungrateful daughter the true worth of the woman she chose to publicly humiliate. And when Bianca discovered the truth, she would also discover that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Her words still reverberated in my head, as if they'd been etched into the walls of the house. But it wasn't just the phrase that hurt me. It was the emptiness that remained afterward, the absence of any remorse, the rush to erase myself from my own horizon. I walked through the rooms with the feeling that every object, every piece of furniture, now held a different meaning. The sofa where we'd once laughed together felt too cold. The kitchen where I'd prepared so many meals for her held a crushing silence. It was as if home had become a strange set, a stage where I was no longer part of the play. At the same time, something inside me struggled to survive. Between the cracks of pain, there were small memories that shone like sparks amidst the darkness. The day she brought me a crooked drawing from school and told me I was her hero. The night when sick, she asked only that I stay by her bedside, holding her hand. These fragments were like distant lights, fragile, but stubbornly remaining lit. The contrast between these memories and the present reality tore me in two. On one side, the wounded mother, about to crumble under the weight of rejection. On the other, the hardened woman who had weathered much greater storms and still managed to rise. This duality kept me awake, as if each heartbeat were a choice between giving in to the void or raising my head. It was like standing on the threshold between two worlds. The darkness of ingratitude and the possibility of a revelation that could change everything. I felt the pain wasn't just a wound, but also a warning. Something was hidden there, deep within her silence, in the contract left on the table, in the calculated gleam in her eyes that no longer saw me as a mother. And so I remained, between sweet memories and dark forebodings, breathing deeply as if holding the air before diving in. There was a greater truth waiting to emerge, and I knew that once it surfaced, there would be no turning back. I began to realize that her every gesture was more calculated than it seemed. It wasn't just coldness or indifference, it was rehearsal. As if every step, every measured word, was already part of a plan that was moving without my being consulted. This realization was like a weight on my chest, but also like a spark lit in the darkness. If there was a plan, there was intention, and if there was intention, I could find the thread that connected all the pieces. The house, which had previously seemed silent, now became a living map. The forgotten contract on the table was no small detail. It was a sign of something larger lurking beneath the surface. I began to observe with the eyes of a trace seeker, noting even the smallest slips. A folder left open, a whispered phone call behind the door, a quick glance that shifted away when it noticed I was paying attention. Everything became clues, like fragments of a puzzle I couldn't afford to ignore. And it's curious how, in moments like these, silence can become an ally. Not reacting immediately was also a strategy. What seemed careless to her was an opportunity to me. Every cruel word I swallowed without a response was like a coin in my pocket. Sooner or later, it would be worth something when the time came to pay the bill. This tension between action and reaction began to shape my days. The effort to contain myself, to wait, was hard, but along with it came the promise of return. Because I knew that when the time was right, the impact would be greater than any hastily spoken word. It was at this point that I asked myself, how many of you have also felt this need to remain silent so that later on you can speak louder? Perhaps this is the difference between being erased and becoming impossible to ignore. I walked the corridors like someone measuring the terrain before a battle. Every seemingly small detail, every shadow moving in the background, revealed that something bigger was about to happen. And this awareness, though painful, gave me a new clarity. The game wasn't over yet, and I wasn't just surviving it. I was already beginning to prepare to change its rules. The silence I'd chosen to maintain began to transform into an invisible weapon. While she believed her haste and calculated gestures went unnoticed, I pieced together every detail like someone gathering loose threads to weave a larger plot. It was curious to see how small movements revealed more than the grand words. A quick glance at the contract, a rehearsed smile in front of her cell phone, the way she locked her bedroom door more frequently. Everything seemed banal, but nothing was by chance. I felt like someone walking across a suspension bridge over a deep river. Each step was fragile, each creak of the wood reminding me of the risk of falling, but at the same time, the view of the other shore kept me steady. There was fear, yes, but along with it came a strange sense of clarity, as if the darkness itself was teaching me to see. The contrast between hope and challenge became more evident with each passing day. Hope arose in the moments I remembered who I truly was, the strength I had already proven in so many past battles. Challenge followed soon after, with a cruel reminder that now it was my own daughter who was testing me. This combination was bitter, but also necessary, because it was in this friction that I found the energy to keep going without giving up. The images that came to me were powerful. I saw myself before a vast board, where every piece she moved was silently observed by me. There were moments when it seemed I was at a disadvantage, almost on the verge of being cornered. But I only needed to observe a little longer to realize that, in fact, every move she made also revealed weaknesses that sooner or later I could exploit. The rhythm of life inside that house had changed. The air seemed thicker, the sounds more pronounced. Even the clink of a glass in the sink sounded like a sign of something about to happen. I breathed deeply, trying to maintain a balance between clarity and uncertainty, between patience and urgency. And deep down, there was a certainty that grew silently. The more she believed I was immobilized, the closer I was to taking the step that would change everything. The thread of revelation became more visible every day, like a line of light piercing the shadows, ready to break through once and for all. The silence that had once seemed overwhelming me now became a field of observation. I no longer saw just her gestures, but what lay hidden behind them. Every hurried word, every closed door, every quick glance at the contract left its mark. And the more I observed, the more I sensed a greater truth approaching, like a wave that swells silently before crashing onto the shore. Nights became the stage where my mind worked tirelessly. I would get up and walk the hallways in the dark, running my hand along the walls as if searching for hidden marks. The house seemed to hold secrets, and I heard every creak of the wood as if it were a whisper. The contrast was cruel. During the day, everything seemed too calm. At night, every detail revealed itself more clearly, as if the shadows had the power to show me what the light insisted on hiding. Within me, confidence and doubt clashed like soldiers at war. Confidence reminded me of who I was, the woman who survived abandonment, humiliation, and the small deaths of everyday life. Doubt, however, whispered in my ear that perhaps it was too late, that perhaps she had already taken steps I could not undo. This internal battle kept me awake, fueling the tension that grew with each passing moment. The images that came to me were strong and almost painful. I saw myself in a brightly lit room, surrounded by gazes, exposing every hidden truth. But then the same scene would fade, and I would find myself alone in an empty room, ignored and forgotten. These two visions alternated like sharp blades, reminding me of the risk I was taking and the importance of each decision. Time seemed to push me toward an invisible limit. I knew that soon, the thread connecting silence and revelation would snap. But I didn't yet know if what would come next would be light that would free me or shadow that would swallow me whole. And this uncertainty, as dense as the night itself, was what kept me alert, breathing deeply, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally show its face. It was in this charged silence that something shifted within me. I was no longer just the wounded mother watching her own story being written without her presence. I became the woman who finally understood the value of every scar, every sleepless night, every humiliation swallowed in silence. It was as if all the layers of pain were reorganizing within me to form a new armor, not of coldness, but of lucidity. I looked at the contract again, and for the first time I felt no fear. The paper that had once seemed like a threat was now a symbol of choice. I understood that it wasn't the contract that decided my future, but I was the one determining its meaning. This clarity was like sunlight streaming into a room sealed for years, blinding at first but soon liberating. The images in my mind took on a different tone. I no longer saw myself lost in an empty room. I saw myself standing tall before everyone, firm, without lowering my eyes. And it didn't matter if they tried to reduce me again, because what I carried inside could no longer be erased. The invisible woman they had once agreed to humiliate no longer existed. In her place was someone who recognized her own worth and didn't need permission to fully exist. This contrast between challenge and achievement made me take a deep breath. I realized that even suffering had been a teacher, that even the tears I shed taught me to see the world without illusions. And suddenly, each bitter memory became a stepping stone, and each step took me higher. If this journey also awakens something in you, allow yourself to leave a sign, a silent gesture that this story resonated within you. Because this is how stories of pain and overcoming become chains of strength, uniting those who have felt the weight of ingratitude and those who choose not to remain silent in the face of it. And so, with my heart still scarred but now awake, I closed my eyes and felt a rare privilege, no longer being defined by rejection. I didn't need to wait for them to recognize my worth. I had already found it. And it was with it that I would write from that moment on the most powerful part of my life.